good morning.
Good morning.
We will have two seminars today. One now, between now and 12 o'clock. Then there will be a lunch pause. And 1:15, we'll start the second one. First seminar is on ethics, and the second one is on power. Power and intercultural and ethics also, from the point of view of intercultural contact relations. Communication. Okay, so we'd like to try to cover two different topics. First thing we'll talk about is what is ethics, and try to get an idea of that. Then we'll discuss some problematic situations. We will discuss also whether there can be some kind of universal valid ethics, or whether ethics is always culturally relative. And we'll give examples of possible differences in ethical systems. And we'll also discuss to some extent the relationship between ethics and intercultural communication. Okay, so as you know, I like you to work a little now and then. We'll start by you working a little. What? Try to give an example, and then also try to give a definition of what ethics is. Talk to your neighbors. Notice the additional question, are all norms ethical? This is supposed to give you a lead.
Morally right as it pertains to
Yeah.
those cultures, they're that's similar ethics, but you kind of just have to they're marketing it's an accepted rule of like what is more but you can
Okay, let's see what you've come up with. Don't look at the internet. Who wants to give it a try? Yeah?
Definition, maybe what is ethics is what is morally correct.
Okay, so now of course, what will I ask you?
If all the norms are right.
What are morals? That's going to be the next question, because you're defining ethics in terms of morals And then, you know, it's also very tempting to define morals in terms of ethics. We have to step one further level down, get a little more specific.
What goes together with your values?
Yeah, the value of a house, for example.
The values?
The value of a house, for example. That's a counterexample, you know. All values are not ethical. Some are, some are not. So we need to, what is ethics all about?
What is socially right and acceptable within a prescriptive culture?
So spelling rules or socially right?
Socially correct.
Yeah,
in terms of how people act towards one another and towards society in general.
Spelling rules, still counterexample?
Depending upon if there's hatred involved in the right.
Now we're getting closer. I don't know if some people hate spelling rules. No, but you know, yeah, you're getting towards, you need to get down into stuff like hatred and stuff. It's not enough to say that it's just social norms that everybody follows. Traffic rules are, spelling rules are.
But is it unethical to run a red light?
Okay, breaking some social rules can have ethical consequences, but the rule in itself, the traffic rule, is a rule about traffic, not ethical. But breaking it can have ethical consequences. So what does it mean that it has ethical consequences?
You're breaking the rules of your the particular culture to which you are affiliated.
Spelling rules?
Okay, there's a word missing in my sentence.
Yes. Not just one word perhaps, but maybe
Can you help me?
But, yeah, you know, ethics has to do with, in their words here, right, wrong, in terms of the well-being of other people. We have to get to this, you know, you should not hurt other people, you should not, yeah, it's about this kind of stuff, right? Let's have a look at what I suggest. Okay. So here's my suggestion. Ethics concerns beliefs, norms, principles, and rules for how to achieve the well-being of others. So here are some examples. Do not hurt others. Do not lie or mislead others. Do not force people to do things against their will. So these are three fairly central dimensions of ethics. Pleasure and pain, you might call the first one. Okay, it's usually people like it if you give them pleasure. They dislike it if you hurt them. That's a very central part of ethics. Do not lie or mislead, so that's another one. Correct information. It's a very strong one. I mean, if you don't have correct information, it's very hard to live a good life. If you base your life on false information, things are probably going to go not so well for you. And then the third one here has to do with force and forcing. So you want people to act by their free will rather than having, being forced to do so because they're afraid of being punished. So these are three central dimensions of ethics. We're going to come back to those three: correct information, pleasure and pain, and freedom in a sense. Being able to do what you want. But we've already said all norms are not ethical. Here are some examples of rules which are not primarily ethical. Traffic rules. These are rules that we are all following, but they're not primarily ethical. Musical scales, how we should play. Spelling rules. Norms for greeting. How do we greet each other when we meet? As you know, it varies with culture, but it's not really an ethical rule. We'll get to this. There's something called etiquette, which means small ethics. You might say that rules for greeting are etiquette. We'll look into this a bit more. And norms for eating nicely. Okay, again, this is not really an ethical rule, but it could be an rule of etiquette. So, behaving unethically can mean two things, and we've already actually what's your name?
Mine?
Yes, your
John.
John, what John said, actually, both of these cases came up, so we've already, in a sense, touched on this. Behaving unethically can mean breaking an ethical rule, so don't hurt other people, so I hurt you, then I'm actually behaving unethically. But it could also mean, and this is what we discussed before, breaking a non-ethical rule in such a way that it has unethical consequences. So if your mother and father think it's extremely important that you eat in a nice way, and you eat like a pig, you've broken a rule of nice eating, but it's not primarily, you're not being unethical. But when you take the feeling of your parents into consideration, that they will be very hurt, but because you don't do this, then the consequences of breaking the rules of eating will have an you're breaking the rule. Which rule? Don't hurt other people. Okay? So that leads to a breach of an ethical rule. That's what I meant before by saying it has unethical consequences. Okay, but this, as I said, does not make the non-ethical rule into an ethical rule. So even if being sloppy about spelling might hurt your teacher, this does not make spelling rules into ethical rules. So I'm beginning to get a sense of what ethics is all about now, I hope. So don't give me an answer later on. It's all the rules that people follow in society. That's not correct. They follow many rules. Some of them are ethical. So ethical values, we've already also seen that there are other values than ethical values, right? There could be economic values, very important in many societies. Could be aesthetical, values of beauty. Perhaps be culinary values, what makes food taste well. So ethics concern beliefs, norms, etc. about how to behave toward others with a concern for their well-being. So let us look at these examples and see which of the following principles are ethical. So the first one, do not hurt others. Well, that's pretty clearly ethical. Do not lie or mislead. Also pretty clearly ethical. Do not force others. Yes. Now it starts to be... my point here is going to be that it's actually not so easy to distinguish ethical. I mean, now I've tried to distinguish it, but we're going to see here that some rules are sort of in between. So this one, don't be a burden on others. Ethical or not ethical?
Culturally dependent.
Huh? Is it ethical? Is it okay to be a burden on others?
I'm a total pain in the ass to my mom.
Yeah. You think it's okay too? You both think it's okay?
Well, I don't think it's okay, but I'm a total pain in the ass to my mother.
Yeah, but you think it's okay? Well, you're a burden on your parents and you think that's fine?
Because I think culturally dependent. In China, the kids, they depend on the parents, but later the parents will be eventually a burden.
So you think you take turns being burdens on each other?
Yeah.
Okay. That's clearly one view, and I think you're right. It's a common view in China. Do we have any Swedes in the room? You know what the Swedes say? Sköta själv och skit i andra. Don't be a burden on others. Actually, it's a fairly strong value in Swedish culture not to be a burden on others. Man ska inte ligga andra till last. So, and that's actually a bit different. So I think many Swedish children today, they used to think, 100 years ago, they used to think like you, in Sweden too. And now, a lot of them think that, you know, parents should help you, but you don't need to help your parents. Things like that. Do you think that way? No, of course not. But I noticed there is this tendency. So it's not so much anymore this, like you seem to have still in China, you know. You help your children when they're small, and later on they help you. Now it's more seems that the parents have to take care of themselves, transport them off to an old age home, whatever. Yeah. So yeah. So, but is it ethical? Well, it's sort of. I would say, yeah, maybe it has a strong ethical element. Still, always be generous to your guests. Is it ethical?
That's etiquette, isn't it?
Huh?
More etiquette.
Etiquette? Well, you might hurt them if you're not nice to them. So you might say there's still a mild element
But
of
nice
ethics.
and generous are different things also, so it's
Okay, you're right. So you think generous is not ethical, but nice would be.
maybe it depends on the situation also.
Yeah. Now, my point here is that this is there are many rules which are not so easy to classify. Some rules are clearly one or the other, but some are not so clearly one or the other. Always do your duty. Ethical?
Yes.
Yes? Well, it's a strong element in the Lutheran Kantian ethics, which we have here in Sweden. But whether, it's natural to think of it as ethical, but it's not maybe as centrally ethical as some of these. Now we get follow the 10 Commandments in the Christian Jewish Bible. Ethical?
No, for you.
Why not? It actually, some of those commandments are like this: do not hurt others. So some of them are clearly, but maybe it has some things in them which are not so clearly ethical. So you should have no other gods than the Jewish Christian God. Is that ethical? Depends. Depends. Not so easy to answer. Okay? Always work hard. Ethical? It's actually, people call this work ethic. But maybe they're using the word ethics in a slightly diluted sense here. Always defend the honor of your family. Very important in many cultures. Ethical? Now we're getting towards the outskirts of ethics. Always eat, now these examples we had before, always eat in a civilized manner, always spell correctly. These I would say are clearly non-ethical. But so 10 and 11 clearly non-ethical, 1, 2, 3 clearly ethical, and the rest has ethical elements, not so easy to say. So that's the picture, okay? But it's clear from this that there are rules which are not ethical, there are rules which are clearly ethical, and there are rules which are sort of in the middle. So ethicalness, you might say, is a matter of degree. The more serious the issue is for the well-being of others, the more ethics is involved. And usually, the more universal the issues become, so you can discuss them, you can expect to be able to discuss them all over the world in many different cultures. So not hurting other people, I think you could discuss this with a person from any culture. This is probably an issue anyway. And it's a good candidate, I would say, for being a universal rule. You should not hurt other people. And I'm going to say, but sometimes you have to, and now we have to, we'll come to that. What are the exceptions to this rule? When is it okay to hurt other people? Maybe under some circumstances it is okay. So some people think, for example, if your children are misbehaving, it's okay to hit them. Do you think that in China? Yes. Okay, we used to think that in Sweden, but then we had a law which told us, no, it's not okay anymore.
I think that discipline.
What?
Discipline.
Discipline is a good thing. Important. Yes. Yeah, but the question is, how do you discipline people? And here cultures vary. Now it used to be,
But let's say your duty is to kill,
Yes.
and then, like, is your duty ethically defendable, and is it ethical to kill in certain instances?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah.
So if you're a soldier, then your duty is to go out there and kill as many of the others as possible. Some people think it's ethically justifiable because you're doing your duty, and they're saying, okay, so the rule of doing your duty, defending your country is more important than the rule don't hurt others. Other people say, no, it's not.
And then usually soldiers, when they recover from war,
Yeah.
they have like mental issues.
Some, yeah.
Like
some
even
do.
if in that moment it was right because your life was, you were threatened,
Yeah.
then after you rethink about it, maybe it goes into different
Yeah. So maybe then the rule don't hurt others, don't kill others,
Yeah,
is a bit
they
stronger.
yeah.
So there are people like the Quakers and pacifists, of course, who refuse to be soldiers because they think that this rule is stronger always. They're not persuaded that they should go out and kill. But many people think yes, because society has made a clearly defined exception to the rule: don't kill other people. Then it's okay. Yeah.
Another question is,
Yeah.
ethics, can they be like historically specific?
Yes.
In the sense that something that is ethical during one period of time will be unethical a few years later, or even weakens?
For the really strong norms, which I'm going to claim later on, perhaps are universal, the answer is no. They should be the same always. But the more things glide out to the periphery, the more it becomes etiquette, the more it's not centrally ethics. It should be, should vary with time and with culture. That's going to be a sort of message I'm trying to bring out here. Okay, so the less serious the issue is for the well-being of others, the less ethics is involved. And instead, we've already mentioned this, etiquette and politeness might be relevant. So politeness and etiquette are very important also, but they're not the central parts of ethics. They're sort of, as the name etiquette should lead you to suspect, it means small ethics. But note that some groups of people take etiquette and politeness very seriously. Maybe you are among those people. Others don't take it as serious. Now we come to the question where we also started off by talking a little about in the first definition. There is another term which is like a competitor of the word ethics for being the central term, and that's the term morals. So you might ask, are morals part of ethics, or are ethics a part of morals? Does anyone in this room have a strong opinion on this? Is one of the words more general and the other word less general?
And more is more Christian. That's just me.
For you, morals are more Christian
Yeah,
religious.
Yeah.
Some people think morals has more to do with sex.
Okay.
Or not
maybe,
sex.
maybe that's right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But however, when you look at the people who write about this, there is no common opinion. Different writers have different opinions. Some people think that morals is a central term. Some people think that ethics is a central term. Some people, this is fairly common to think that morals has to do a little more with personal standards. My personal morals forbids me, but some people, then somebody will say, well, my personal ethics forbids me to do this. So it's not so clear. But there is maybe a slight tendency. And when people talk about something being immoral, it's quite often that people think, as I said, about sexual issues. when you say it's unethical, you don't think as quickly about sex. I don't know if this is a constant tendency in the language, but I have, let's say, at least for about 20 or 30 years, there was a tendency that immoral had this kind of aspect, more than unethical. If you try to find a solution to this question by going back to the origins of these words, sometimes that helps. You go back and you look at the original meanings of the words. Doesn't always help. We'll see if it helps in this case. So we are going back with the word ethics to Greek, and we come to, you haven't studied rhetoric. Yeah, I told you a little about rhetoric when we had the communication theory. You remember this word ethos?
Yes.
So that's where we get to. Actually, the origin of that word is customs. Okay, so that we get to the Greek word for ethos, customs. Now, if we follow history back with the word morals, we get to Latin, not to Greek. So we get to mores, and lo and behold, this word also means customs. It doesn't really help us. Both words mean more or less the same thing originally. So that sort of explains why it's very hard to choose between them. There is a tendency, I think, for ethics to be the more general word. That's the one I'm using, as you notice. But, I mean, I'm not swearing on the Bible with this word, as they say in the Christian. If somebody wants to use morals as the most central term, you are free to do so. Yeah. And okay, we already talked about etiquette and politeness. They are also there as important things which we have to consider, perhaps also when we think about ethics. Okay, now we come to the question, who are the ethical norms valid for, and in what situations are they valid? So, anybody want to propose an answer to who are ethical norms valid for?
Everyone.
Everyone. What does everyone include?
Within a particular culture.
So you want to become only, if you're Swedish, then only the Swedes.
Well, what applies to a Swede in terms of what is morally right and wrong will be markedly different from somebody that comes from the other part of the world, from another part of the world.
At least for the etiquette part. But as we said, maybe the central values, not so clear. But that's one view, that it actually applies then to your national or your ethnic group. But when you said everyone, did you have that in mind?
No, I meant everyone in the world.
But I'm still a little curious. Who is part of everyone? You're Muslim, right?
Yes.
But if we have some Buddhists in here?
No.
No? Not you, Chinese? Any Hindus in here? No? What do you think they would say? Who is everyone?
All living things.
Yes, all living things. Why are we supposed to be vegetarians? Because it's wrong to kill other living things. Okay, so it depends on how radical you are. Right? Some people will say all living things, some people will say all human beings, some people will be more restricted and say only my own national group. I'll show you a list now where we have some alternatives. Okay? Real egotists think only they themselves, myself. I'm the only person who should not be hurt, who should not be forced, etc. Okay? Then there are other people who are a little broader. They say, okay, my family. I'm going to defend my family, my wife, my children, my etc. Then we have, these occur. I don't know. This one I think is never officially. I mean, unofficially, some people are like this, but it's never the official view, I think. But when we get here, my family, my kin, you get to societies where this certainly is what is practiced. So here you have a clan society, yeah?
There's a Bedouin proverb that states, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me and my brother and my cousin against the world.
Yeah. That reflects this kind of thinking, yeah. Yeah, some people will say my region. So yeah.
I was thinking children and maybe also disabled people. They are not ethical sometimes.
Yeah, I think like a kid is only 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, he can
I
do
also
some
want
harm. I think
to-
6.
Below 6, they are not ethical subjects. 6
No,
months.
6 months, I mean. Yeah, only 6
So
months.
before 6 months old, we don't have to treat them ethically.
Would it
No,
be the other way?
I
think she means
mean
the-
themselves toward the others.
It's up to society to protect those that cannot protect themselves.
Exactly.
The self.
I'm not sure what you mean. You mean that they themselves, the
Yeah,
little
they
babies,
themselves.
they cannot think ethically. They are like this. They only take care of themselves before 6 months old. Is that what you mean? It might be. I'm not sure what you meant actually.
Maybe they mean that they cannot be held responsible for their actions.
Is that what you mean?
I can't hear you.
He says that the children under 6 months are not morally responsible. They cannot be
Yes.
held. That's what you mean.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable. But the fact that you cannot be held responsible doesn't really mean that we cannot, that we shouldn't think of you ethically, that we should not, take you into ethical consideration, think of your well-being. So children under 6 months, not just taking care of them all the time and worried about their well-being, and I think mother should, or father too, perhaps. Yeah. That's the way it should be. So the fact that you cannot be held morally responsible doesn't necessarily excuse us from treating you ethically. You agree? Yeah. Okay. So we have ethnic group or country. We discussed that. Anybody? I know strong feminists might think that you should only be ethical to other women, or if you're a male chauvinist, you think you should only be ethical to men. I don't know. Age group should only be ethical to this people of your own age. Race, this one is actually being practiced, right? You don't have to worry about people of other races. This is why this was used as a kind of excuse for keeping people in slavery. This has been a very strong one in the history of the world, and is still today used. Species, now here's where the Buddhists and the Hindus are going to say, okay, it's not enough to think just of human beings. We have to think of all living beings. So here, there's quite a variation, and these things can vary between, how you see this can vary between different cultures. All cultures don't have the same view here. In a culture where you have a lot of Buddhism or Hinduism, you're going to have more people who think it's very important to think also of other other living beings. And we can see there's been a cultural change in the West. So vegetarianism for ethical reasons, not just for health reasons, but for ethical reasons, has become more common over the last 50 years. How many are vegetarians in this room now? Okay. Are you vegetarian for ethical reasons?
I am.
Well, how many of you that put up your hands are vegetarians for ethical reasons? So actually, all of you. No, not you. You're for health reasons. Okay. But at least 5 of 6 give ethical reasons. So you're also on the way down to having a broader notion of ethics than just human beings. Yeah. So in what situations are ethical norms valid? So let's say that we think that do not kill is a universal norm, universal ethical norm. But somebody soon, if I say that, somebody's going to say, but people are killed all the time, you know. So why do you say that? How can you believe that? So here are two of the obvious exceptions to this rule. War, when people are told to go out and kill other people, and if you're a bad criminal, and in some countries we still have death penalty, then you're executed. Is this a counterexample to saying that do not kill is a universal ethical norm?
Actually, I think that it would be in Poland, we would talk as well about abortion.
Yeah, that abortion could be on this list, I agree. And you see clearly cultural differences here, whether that's defined as...
Well, in Sweden, abortion is as a medical treatment, then in Poland, this is like straight killing.
Right. But in Poland 40 years ago, people went from Sweden because it was easier to get abortions in Poland than in Sweden. So it's also a very interesting and good illustration of how culture can change fairly quickly.
Yeah, I would connect it more with politics because...
yeah, but politics are not innocent in culture.
Yeah, I mean, like now the church is taking much over in Poland in politics, and this is
Before
like...
you had another church called the Communist Party.
Exactly. or Russia.
Yeah, I know. But it shows how culture, you know, can change fairly quickly under different ideological pressures. Yeah, that's actually a nice example how Poland has changed its view on abortion. Yeah, but you know the question is, are these things real counterexamples to the claim that do not kill is a universal ethical rule? Well, I think they are not. I think that any rule you have is going to have some defined exceptions. But let's say the general rule is do not kill, except if we are in war, except if you're a criminal who is to be punished. But the default assumption is that you should not kill other people in the relevant ethical group. Okay, that's another important addition. So if you're in a culture where you believe that only your own ethnic group are the ones that you have to take into account, everyone else can be treated unethically, then of course that's what's going to happen. You do not kill applies only to your relations to the other people in your own group. Right? So that's going to be the case with all of these rules, that they are valid as kind of default rules where you have to, given certain exceptions which can be stated. The same way here, do not steal. Generally valid rule, do not steal except if you're in war where it's allowed to steal, maybe, or at least used to be. And now they try to write rules for war where stealing is going to be disallowed. But in most wars, people have just been stealing a lot. Another kind of stealing, you might call it, is when the state desires that it can, as it's called, expropriate your property. Means you own something, but the government says it's important for national interests that we take over. Yeah.
Sorry, you're saying stealing in times of war is considered, has been in the past considered ethical?
Yeah.
Yes, that's okay.
Is stealing and there's a difference between foraging and stealing.
Okay, I'm not making that distinction right now.
Okay. Because
But if you make that,
stealing is still stealing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It didn't belong to you. So
Okay, you might have a more narrow notion of stealing now, but if my troops come into your country, okay, we go into your houses, we steal your good paintings, we take your good paintings, we take your statues, etc., we bring them to our country. You might want not to call it stealing, you can call it foraging, but...
I was talking in terms of feeding one's troops, but...
Oh, okay. No, I was thinking more of taking a lot of other things.
You're talking material things.
Yeah, material things.
But is that ethically, are you saying that has been considered ethically okay?
I don't know if it's been
Or it's just
considered
what happens during
ethically
times of
okay.
war?
It's been considered okay.
Okay.
I don't know if it's been, I mean, if you really press Napoleon or somebody else who used to do this sort of thing, you know, is it ethically okay, Napoleon? I don't know what he would have said. I don't know. But de facto they did this all the time.
It still happens.
Yeah, still. Yeah. So here's another one. Do not remove somebody's freedom. Well, why do we put people in prison? Okay, we do it with certain defined exceptions. So normally, if you're not a criminal and you haven't done something which is punishable by prison, then you should not be put in prison. And we consider it ethically wrong to deprive somebody of their freedom if they haven't done something which is supposed to lead to deprivation of freedom. So, the norms have a contextual, situational scope and are valid unless there is a norm defining a limitation of the norm. That's what meant by a default case. What we assume to hold unless there is some exception to the rule. Okay, maybe this is the right time for a short pause. Freedom, pleasure and pain, and correct information. We can use those again here. So we start with a freedom thing. We all want to act according to our own will and intentions. I want to be able to do what I think is best. So we start there. And then if we now imagine that other people are like me, like you, then we get to the ethical step. I want to act according to my will and intentions. Now if I'm ethical, I should make it possible for other people to act according to their own will and intentions. Okay? I want to escape pain and seek pleasure. If I'm ethical, I should try to make it possible for other people to escape pain and seek pleasure. Yeah?
I was just thinking about you're talking about the free will.
Yeah?
What about countries where free will is quite restricted, but it's considered socially acceptable?
To restrict it.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it follows the same thing we said before. The general thing is that default is we can act according to our own free will, and we should try to make it possible for other people. But then we can introduce all sorts of social restrictions which diminish this. And one radical restriction is if we define certain people in our own society to be outside of the group to which the ethical norms apply. So let's take antiquity, where they defined always, in all the European societies, a large group of people as slaves, to whom the ethical norms did not really apply, right? But they were outside of the norm group then. So that's okay. But inside the norm group, let's say the free Romans who ran the Roman Empire, or the free Athenians in Greece, there you would think that these ethical norms would hold. Again, there could be exceptions defined even there of various types. Okay, and the last one is act as rationally and you want to be able to act rationally, competently and adequately. Now if you want to do that, then if you're ethical, you should try to make it possible for other people to also act rationally. Now, and one very important precondition of being able to act rationally is to have correct information. So this is where the need for correct information comes in, why you should not lie. You cannot really act rationally if you don't have correct information. Okay, so this is going from needs of single people, assuming that we can all imagine that other people are like ourselves. We have these needs, then if we want to be ethical, if we have concern for the well-being of other people, we should try to make it possible for them also to have the same needs satisfied. That's the idea. Okay, now this also leads us to another issue that I think we've discussed before. Human beings are not just different. I mean, when we do intercultural communication and we talk a lot about cultural differences, but we should also talk about human similarities across cultures. And Well, there are many similarities. There are basic similarities concerning perception, cognition, emotion, and communication. We can assume that people in all cultures are rational in some sense. They try to pursue the goals that they are interested in. People everywhere have certain basic needs like hunger and thirst, sexual reproduction, etc. And we may assume that there could be certain ethical norms which are the same across cultures. We've already discussed this, in what sense that might be true. In all cultures there will be a need to take care of particular stages in life, like the birth of a new person, the death of a person, coming of age, etc. There are different things. We can perhaps find certain common foci for values. So perhaps in all cultures there is something that we could call friendship. And so there will be a discussion about the correct way to treat your friends. So we might assume that everywhere in any human culture there will be some values, ideas about the proper and correct way to treat friends. There might be some idea about the proper and correct way to work, what your attitude should be towards work, how you should bring up your children, the relationship between man and woman, etc. These are all possible universal points that you might discuss in any culture. I mean, the opinions that people will have in these cultures will be different, but all I'm claiming here is that these are possible foci, one focus, several foci, that you could hope to find in all human cultures. Basic ways of producing food, basic instruments to produce food. Here are other possible universals. And a certain need for social organization. We also expect to find that. Okay, but the topic that I'm interested in right now is whether there could be universal ethical norms. So, are there universals of ethics?
Professor, could you go back just one quick second?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You didn't have a question, you just wanted to write it down.
I just wanted to get the last three things down.
Okay. Got them?
Yes. Thank you.
So, there might be different ways in which we could interpret what should be meant by universal ethics. One way to interpret it is that that it's a biologically given instinct that all human beings are created, or by biology, by their genes, have an instinct not to kill other people, not to hurt other people who are part of their own group. And that's one way to think of it. So there are innate natural tendencies to treat other people in certain ways, to give them freedom, to not hurt them, etc. And this is one possibility to interpret what is meant by universal ethics. Another possibility is to say that, okay, we don't know about biology, but we know that we could call people from all cultures to come to a big meeting. Okay, so we could ask one representative, I don't know how many countries there are, but maybe there are just about 200 countries. And we could ask them all to come to a big meeting. And in this meeting we will sit down and discuss. We need universal ethics on this planet. Let us agree on certain rules that we're all going to follow. Okay, so this would be a socially constructed, negotiated set of norms. In fact, such a set already exists. Probably know this. It's the United Nations Code of human. There is a UN Convention chart for which is
that the Millennium Goals, you mean?
Huh?
The Millennium Goals?
No, it's human rights.
That's what those are.
Yeah. Huh?
They're basic set of needs and values that the UN has set forth that should be achieved in the next.
No. This was. It's just like the U.S. Constitution. It's a declaration of what the rights are.
Yes.
So it's not something. It's achieved already now. It's supposed to be valid right now. And it was done, I think, right after the creation of the UN. So not something like 1946, 47, around that time. So we do actually have such a document, and that's another meaning, another possible meaning of what universal ethics could be. Now you might not like those rules, so you could say we should have a new meeting and change some of the rules. And that's possible. That's always possible if it's a socially constructed thing. Okay, the third source of universal ethics might be religion. So in fact, all religions claim that they are the only true religion. Okay? And they, as part of their message, they usually have a set of ethical norms, which everybody is supposed to follow. So the Christians have one set, the Muslims have another set, the Buddhists have one set, the Hindus have one set. The problem is that, they all claim this, and they're all slightly different. So it's hard to say that, well, it could be that one of them is right, and all the others are wrong, but it's hard to say which one. Another possibility is that none of them are really right, so I don't know. Yeah. So, but anyway, the religions often have this claim that they, in their religion, have a universal ethics. So these are three kinds of sources of universal ethics. First one, human biology. Second, big social meeting. And the third one, the religion. So, universal ethics can be there in all of these three senses. And to some extent, it is there in all three senses, I would think. So, once having discussed this, you can still continue to discuss it, and you can say that maybe we should distinguish between two different questions. The normative question, do we need on this planet a universal set of ethics? Let's say there is no universal set of ethics right now. Should we not create one then, for example, in the social sense? So that's the question, should there be a universal set of ethical norms? You might answer yes or no. Another question is there already one in the three senses we discussed? And I would claim that yes, in all three senses we already have candidates for universal norms. We have some candidates that we think are given by biology. We have some candidates in the UN Human Rights Bill. And we have several religions who all claim that they have the right answer. So actually, both, you might say yes to both the normative and the descriptive perspective. We do have such candidates, and maybe it's also very good. We should have the universal ethics. It will make it easier to live on this planet. It's easier to create socially acceptable order if we have some ethics that everybody accepts.
I didn't guess the descriptive perspective.
Descriptive is it really the case that we have universal ethics? Okay, let's go back. Yes, we have certain rules, we have certain religion, all religions in fact. So yes, it's true, we have religions who are claiming to have a universal ethics. Okay. Social, yes, we have had a meeting, the UN has such a bill which is based on a meeting with all the countries. There's a problem with that, not all countries were actually in the UN at that time. So you might say that this should be done once more. You get all countries, but all the countries that were members of the UN at that time actually were in the decision and making of those rules. The first one is, do we have reason to think that there might be some biologically given ethical norms? Well, at least personally, I think that we do. I think it's a natural human tendency not to want to hurt those that belong to your own group, not to lie to people who belong to your own group, etc. I mean, so I think that there is a good claim that, yeah, we have natural basis. We have this. We have all three of these kinds of bases for universal ethics. Okay. So I think you can think about this now just to reinforce the point. Try to come up with an example of something you believe to be a universal ethical rule. English.
Okay, so do you mean what is like theoretically an ethical norm, or what is an ethical norm like in practice as well?
Both.
Okay, then it becomes very long.
To meet and or you go around talking to people.
Yeah, but also like
Yeah. General sense to make I suppose you could, but how often do you actually see that? People like to stay together. You mean, are you referring to your ability to gather free I understand what you're saying. How does that pertain to being in
Okay, let's hear. So do we have any suggestions? For example, you that just asked me, what's your suggestion?
Well, we started talking about how you can try to be ethical in what you're doing, but still fail to do so. And that led us to another question, whether the ends justify the means, or the other way around.
Do you think that's an ethical rule?
No, not a rule, but it could be an aspect to be taken into account.
Yes. True, but you didn't actually come up with a candidate for a universal ethical rule.
No, I mean,
You just did the groundwork around discussing.
yeah, but I mean, do not kill also has some problematic implications.
Absolutely, but
All
that
those
would be that is a candidate.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was thinking to mingle, like to meet and organize yourself and the others in a like to build up the society, so to collaborate, to meet, interact.
ability of free movement.
Yeah. Let's take the first one. You should mingle with other people. That's the ethical rule.
Yeah, I was thinking if it can be an ethical rule because
Social rules.
yeah, it's like you can't build up a society or without.
Could it clash with other ethical rules?
What again,
For example, if you have a rule, give everybody freedom. Always mingle.
not always. I mean, every time of the day, but generally.
But often mingle, but still you can see that there could be a clash, right? Between that norm and giving people freedom. Some people might not want to mingle.
Yeah, but if you mingle and build up a society, that's how you get freedom also.
But I mean, I'm not saying that the fact there is this clash. You see that yourself, right? Yeah. Now that's not unique to this case. In fact, we're just going to come to that. All ethical norms tend to have points where they clash. So it's not an argument really against suggesting mingling as an ethical norm. But you think it would lead to well-being of others and so on, so it is a good candidate. Yeah, possibly. And we should note that it could clash, but we'll see others do as well. Yeah, good. Any other suggestion? Yeah?
We were discussing trafficking.
Trafficking, yeah?
Selling by people is considered, I guess, unethical everywhere.
Yes.
But maybe it hasn't been like that always. We were
No.
discussing that as
I mean,
well.
we just talked about slavery, which was okay for many thousand years.
Exactly. So is it still an ethical rule? Yeah.
Well, yeah, now it comes to our norm group, right? If we believe that all human beings or all living beings, of course, then it's going to be very unethical. But if we believe that only my group, it's okay, then the others are not really human beings, so they can be slaves. So it depends on how you define your norm group. You have to say that if we assume that all human beings are supposed to be free, etc., this is clearly a breach of the, especially, could probably also be hurt, not hurt, but at least not give freedom. So it's a clear breach, I would say. So in this case, you're giving a suggestion for a universal negative norm. Don't traffic. No, it's not. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like don't kill, you might say. Yeah?
Do not lie.
Do not lie, yes. I think that's a good candidate. That's pretty straightforward. I think you've sort of got the message. Okay, so we have these are some of the things we just discussed. Do not hurt, do not lie, mislead. And we have already discussed also that if you say that there are such universal rules, you are going to have problems with all the exceptions that people come up with, and you have to have something to say about that. You suggest don't kill, what about soldiers in war, etc. So we've said that none of these rules can be believed to be correct unless you also state some textual restrictions on them. They all need that. Okay, now give an example of cultural difference in what is ethically acceptable.
A lot of the science East Carolina, but just Texas kills more people and executes more people than the rest of the United States combined. In every safe base rather than 30 There's nothing can What is it called? The brand of Islam that's practiced in Saudi Arabia? Yeah.
But they're very narrow viewed in terms of that's it.
So, now we need some examples of possible differences in ethical norms between cultures. Yeah?
An example in our group was child labor. In many European and Western countries, it is forbidden that children under a certain age work, whereas in other countries, in maybe Africa or Asia, kids it's socially maybe accepted that kids are working, or it's not moral that they work.
So I guess child labor is forbidden in many countries because we don't want to hurt children or something like that.
We do not force that.
And we should not force children. They should be given freedom. But then we come to some countries where they obviously do not make that. They have more restricted freedom and not hurting of children. It's a good example. Yeah. Other examples? Democracy. But you said that you haven't spoken before.
Death penalty.
Death penalty, yes, very good example. So the let's say not killing is an ethical norm valid everywhere. But the restriction, we said that all rules have contextual restrictions, and one such is death penalty for certain crimes. Okay? That obviously cultures will now differ in where they draw the line, which crimes are given death penalty. And so even in Sweden, I'm not sure, I think we still have death penalty.
What?
We don't? In
For
war?
espionage, I think.
For espionage, yeah, in war, I think we do.
But we haven't taken.
I mean, most countries, Sweden has removed death penalty for almost everything, but maybe there's one thing left in time of war and so on.
For treason, high treason.
It could be. But obviously you could arrange countries in the world on a scale for how many things they give death penalty. This is going to be a big cultural variation. Yeah, and you, democracy? What do you want to say about democracy?
Yeah, it's a big value here, and it's an ethical value.
Why is it ethical?
Because they have control of your own life, and some places, in other places, the democracy is not. So,
well, it's a very attenuated set of control of your own life. I mean, I go there and I vote, and my vote doesn't count because somebody else wins. How do I control my own life? It's a very. I would put democracy maybe not in the center.
I think democracy and freedom of speech was what we talk about also. So
why is freedom of speech ethical?
It's a right to express your opinion.
Yeah, so it has to do with the not force people.
Yeah.
If you want to say something, you should be able to. I agree. It's a special case of the not forcing people, give people freedom. Yeah.
But with democracy, isn't it that even though your party doesn't win, your acceptance of the rules and to follow the will of the people?
Yeah. Why is this ethical?
Well, it's the way society. Without this
But there are
built
some,
in, it would
there are some
cause
interesting
chaos.
cases. You know that Hitler actually got to power by democratic election.
I do.
Yeah. And you know that once he got into power, he started hurting people. He allowed, for example, massacre on Jews and so on.
Yes, of course. But they knew that beforehand, that he was an idiot going into it and they still put him into power.
Right, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a very big clash with some when he got into power, and it became the duty of Germans to do various things which we don't think are so great. So a lot of Germans were, I would say, under ethical pressure. There were some central ethical values which were being neglected by the regime. And so many Germans were in an ethical dilemma, I think. And what this shows is that maybe democratically elected regimes, we talked about that when we talked about do your duty and so on, maybe it's not as central as things like don't hurt other people, etc. I would think it's a little less central.
Oh, I would agree with that assertion for sure.
Yeah.
But there's an element that's...
There's an element, I mean, because we said there are lots of rules which are sort of intermediate between the two, and I think democracy is maybe one of those. Yeah? Anything else? Sorry? The?
Like when you're severing a very hot sickness and you have the right to choose you want to die. You want to die.
Yeah. So you're talking about euthanasia? Euthanasia, sorry.
No, that's
when you help somebody who wants to die and you help them to die. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yes. After the willing of that person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's clearly we have different opinions in different cultures on this.
Yeah, for example, in I could say my culture or some Asian countries, this is very sensitive because this is against the natural law or something. Yeah, but for some
not so many Western countries.
Yeah, not so many Western countries. Is some Western.
In some Western countries, yes. I think in Holland
and
Switzerland, only two maybe.
Yeah. There's a movement afoot in many countries. Canada being one of them.
Right. But it's not so common. I mean, no, these are all good examples. I think you're getting the idea. Nice way. Okay, so how can cultural variation concerning ethical norms arise? Well, different ethical norms might develop because they have people are interested in different things in different cultures. So, people might think that property is very important and you hurt people very much if you take their property. In other places they might think it's not so important. You can take their property. In other places they might think religion and not being disrespectful to what is considered holy or spiritual is very important. Clearly, if you look around the world, you can see that different cultures have different interests in what they consider as being very important. There is also this conflict of norms. So one of the most common conflict of norms is the conflict between not lying and not hurting. So many people, how shall I put this? You see somebody else who is making a big mistake or doing something stupid. Should you tell that person that, or should you be nice and say something else? Or a person comes dressed in a horrible dress. Should you tell the person that's a horrible dress? Or should you try to say something, should you even say that's a very nice dress?
No, that would be lying.
That would be lying.
Just give equivocal response.
Huh?
Just give an equivocal response.
You might, yes. But you all see the problem here. I mean, it can come up that giving people correct information might involve hurting them. What do we do? This is an example of a conflict between two norms. Don't hurt people and don't lie. And what we do then is we try to find either we think one of these norms is more important than the other one. So perhaps we think not hurting or giving pleasure is the most important one, so we lie a lot. I mean, it could include not hurting oneself, right? So that's an easy way to get out of a problematic situation. Just lie a little, and you can get out. Or you might think that not lying is more important they're not hurting. So you will always say to people what you think is true. That's a horrible dress. Etc. Okay. But most people are sort of, they have this dilemma and they choose one or the other. We might also think that not only is this a difference between individual people, but it could also be a cultural tendency. So in some cultures it might be more okay to lie in order not to hurt people, and in some cultures it might be less okay to lie not to hurt people. So you should just tell the truth, even if it hurts people. In fact, we have investigated Europe from this point of view. And what we find is that in North Europe, actually we tell the truth a bit more. In South Europe, we don't hurt people that much, so we tell more lies. This is the difference between the, different countries in Europe. And there have been big questionnaire studies on this, and they all seem to point in the same direction. So some people, have you heard about the concept of social competence? Yeah. Some people think it's part of social competence to lie. How many people here think it's okay to lie? How many people think it's not important, not okay? Okay, so we have a majority here who think it's okay to lie, and we have a minority who is more in favor of telling the truth. Yeah. We might have also continued this investigation by looking at where those who prefer lying to not hurting, and those who prefer telling the truth, where you come from. Maybe you come from places where, like North Europe, South Europe, I don't know. Could also be more individual. Yeah?
Do you know if they separate white lies with blue lies in this study?
Well, we're talking a lot about white lies now, right? Most of these things are what those who think that lying is part of social competence, they call them white lies. Those who don't think that lying is ever a good thing, they're not going to use white lies so much. They're just going to call it a lie. Okay. Then we've already discussed this, that there can be different norms concerning contextual specification. And we've looked at what is given the death penalty. We had that example, for example. That's one such example. And we've looked at how in different cultures, different groups have been considered the norm group. Okay. Norm group we've already discussed, I think. Clashing of norms we've also to some extent already discussed. You could also imagine that there can be a clash between giving people freedom and not hurting them. When does this clash come up very often? Yeah?
No, I was thinking about the lies. Okay.
You want to ask a different question?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. I was thinking about lies to save face.
Yes?
Not
So, whose face? Your own or somebody else's?
your own.
Your own. Okay, so you don't want to hurt yourself, so you lie.
Yeah.
Okay?
I think it's pretty common.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common too. So, and again, we might think that there might even be a cultural difference here, but I think it's more acceptable to lie in order to save the feelings of another person than it is to lie to save your own self from being hurt. But it's possible that there's some culture. How many people think it's okay to lie to save yourself? Many. Okay, it's even okay. Interesting. I'm surprised. Okay. I would have thought that lying to save the feelings of another person, yeah, but lying to save your own feelings. You can see that I'm more on the side of telling the truth. I'm from North Europe. I'm not so fond of lying to get out of a problematic situation. Okay, but freedom, clash between freedom and not hurting. When does this come up? Well, it comes up a lot in bringing up children. Because they say, I want to do such and such, and you say, if you're a parent, no, you're going to do your homework now, you cannot watch TV. So you are not giving them their freedom, you're forcing them to do something, and your own motive for that is probably that this is in the long run good for you. You will have more pleasure and less pain if you do your homework. But bringing up children is full of this conflict all the time. Children want to do one thing and parents want them to do another thing. Yeah, so I mean you can imagine yourself, nearly all ethical norms involve that if you follow them to an extreme, they will clash with other ethical norms.
What do you mean by no force, no pain, and freedom?
That's what I just told you, bringing up children.
You
don't
don't
get it?
force the freedom on them. You don't hurt them by making them do their homework. Okay?
Pain and pleasure go together, right? So it's, you know, you don't give them pain, instead you should give them pleasure. So by doing their homework, you're giving them some pain. They want to do something else, but it's also long-term pleasure. But so giving somebody pain is not a good thing normally, but you're doing that to get more long-term. Yeah. Okay. Ethics can also be put into the context of activity. So if we look at different activities, we might imagine that certain ethical rules become more or less important. So for example, if we compare an academic seminar with a dinner party, it might be more important to tell the truth in an academic seminar, because the goal of the whole thing is to try to find the truth. But if you're in a dinner party, it might be considered impolite to go against what the host is saying or something like that. But in an academic seminar, if it works properly, I must say that because sometimes it's more like a dinner party, but if it works properly, it should be okay to go against what one person is claiming and say, no, that's not correct, you haven't thought of this and this. If you do that at a dinner party, well, in some dinner parties it might be correct, but it might also in many dinner parties not be the correct thing to do. So different purposes of activities could lead to different focus on different ethical rules. In the same way, different roles that you are in an activity might lead to different stress on different ethical norms. So if there's a power difference between a subordinate and a superordinate person, we'll talk more about that after lunch. If you think that not giving pain is more important than correct information, that's probably often going to be reinforced by a power difference. If you are subordinate, you're talking to your boss, you in many cases probably are not going to tell the truth. You're going to say something which the boss thinks is nice. While the boss might have, in many cases, the other point of view. He wants things to work correctly, so he wants, the truth. He'll tell you the truth and not perhaps always worry about your feelings. But if you're in a country where you have strong trade unions and so on, then the boss might be more careful and also lie to you. But normally you would think that the role of the subordinate versus the role of the boss will sort of lead to different emphasis. The subordinate will be trying to please the boss will want the truth out and characterize this person, the correct way to increase efficiency. Okay. Let's see, what should I not forget to say? We're getting towards. Yeah, one thing that is interesting to study in different cultures is the consequences of communication in terms of commitments. If you promise to do something by a certain time, is that ethical? Well, to some extent it could be. Because you're making a promise and you should not lie, etc. So what is a commitment? How are commitments made? How important are commitments and obligations? Here, different cultures vary. So in some places, if you've said you're going to do something, you have to do it. In other cultures, you always think of lots of excuses. You don't come in time, you don't do the things when they're supposed to be done, etc. I can say that in my experience in Europe, I've been in many European projects. There are big differences between countries in Europe in this regard. Some countries we expect, things to come in always late. Other countries we expect them to always be on time. I'm not going to say exactly what my expectations are now, but I have such expectations. Yeah?
I have a question about the commitment, and if I was thinking about it, is it universally that if you are shaking hands and saying let's do this project, that it's like an agreement and you're committing yourself to something, maybe not with the deadlines and the time frame, but the act of saying let's do this project, is that not something that is around the world, something that your word is something people value?
I don't know if everyone shakes hands, but giving your word might be a better candidate than the handshake, because the handshake isn't there always. But just saying that you will do something is probably something that there is a certain expectation that you will do that in all cultures. But there is a but here. It seems that this way of agreeing on things was somewhat more important before we had writing. Okay, once we started to have writing, there were people around who said that it's not enough just to give your word. We must write it down. And once the lawyers appeared on the scene where they could make money by having contracts, the handshake became even less important. So in cultures where you had a lot of, let's say, interference by writing, by contracts, I think that has devalued the role of the handshake and giving your word. But in purely oral cultures, I think it's very important. And to some extent, all cultures are oral. But there has been a large influx of writing in many places. Yeah?
I think there are some parts of the world where handshaking is more important than writing. Because with a contract, you can always, and lawyers, you can always find a way around and turn things in your favor.
Yeah.
But handshaking is like giving your word and putting your honor and your face into the game.
Yes.
And
from the point of honor, but from the point of, if you have a country where they have a strong legal system and they have courts, then the contract people will win in the end.
Yeah.
You must just deny it. I never said that. But if you've written your name, and you have a contract, then you will lose. So, yeah. Okay, I think we've come to the end here now. So we've given some overview of issues related to ethics in communication. Whoops, disappeared. I don't know why it disappeared at this point. In any case, let's see if we can get it back. Yeah, so all this says is that we have done, I tried to give you an idea of what ethics is and how there can be both similarities and differences between cultures with regard to ethics. There is an exercise that you have to do, which I hope is the one I have here. We have discussed most of these things, so it should not be so difficult for you to do these. First one, we started by discussing what are ethical values, and then we want examples of possible cultural differences concerning ethical values. But I think Natalia has sent this out. I think so. Give 2 examples of how ethical differences can influence communication. Give 1 example of how ethical similarity can influence communications. You think you can do you understand the questions? Yeah. Okay, then we take a lunch. Do you have a question?
Yeah, is there a deadline for this?
I don't know. But I know that we have a lunch break and we'll meet together for a last one.
No.